Good morning. Welcome to St. Paul's United Methodist Church here on this beautiful spring Sunday. I'm speaking to you this morning from the parsonage of St. Paul's here in Boulder, and I'm doing this because Boulder, indeed as all of Colorado, is currently under a stay-at-home order. So in order to be good stewards of what God has given us and to be good citizens, we're offering this time together in a different setting, but a very familiar story. So this week, we're looking at Thursday of Holy Week. Traditionally, it's called Maundy Thursday. Sometimes now it's called Holy Thursday, by whatever name. It begins in the 14th chapter of Mark, in the 12th verse, and continues through the 65th verse. Now, as you know from hearing Mark before, that Mark is about action. And so these passages are very important to us as Christians because they speak to us about where we are, what we're doing, and where we're going. And as we find in a time such as this, who you're going with is just as important. So this section of Mark is divided into three, and so you know right away that it's important. So the first section it begins like this. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was to be sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and make the preparations for you to eat the Passover?" And so Mark introduces us right away to this idea that Jesus is a Jew, part of his community, and his disciples were observant of the traditions of their people. You know about what we sometimes call the Last Supper, but maybe a better way of looking at it, or a different way, is instead of the Last Supper, it's the First Supper. Last Supper because we think this is the last meal Jesus ate. Well, we know from other places in the Gospel that he ate with the disciples in Galilee after the resurrection. But this is one of those passages where you can get so focused on what's familiar and why it's familiar that you lose the nuances of the text. So I don't want to spend a lot of time this morning on the Last Supper because, well, we'll get to that next week. But the middle section of these three, what happens in Gethsemane, this is the largest part of Thursday for Mark. 27 verses. The first section had 14, the last section has 13. So in this bulk of this chapter, we have this energy and a spiritual dimension that sometimes gets lost in the events surrounding it. So I'm going to share just a portion of these events in the Garden of Gethsemane. Beginning at verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And he went a little farther. He threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come to the time of trial. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words, and once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." What happens in the garden? There's that hymn, I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the lilies. And we romanticize it. But in this passage, there's this feeling that something is about to happen. The tension in these words is palpable. Jesus takes his disciples, the 12, out of the city, only about 100 yards, so not far outside the city wall is the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus begins to be agitated. And he's straining to experience and to share something. But before he does, he takes 3 disciples. There's that number again. And he goes a little bit farther into the garden and he says, "Stay here and I'll pray." So Jesus is practicing social distance. He asks his God, "Nothing is impossible for you. Make this time of trial pass me. But not what I want, but what you want." And he comes back to the 3 disciples and he chastises them for being not ready. Not ready for when the need is just there. How can you not be ready when God is with you? So he goes off and prays again. A second time he comes back. Takes them to task one more time. A third time he goes off and you can just feel this anxiety, this angst hanging in the air. The third time he returns to the disciples and he said, "Enough. Get up. The time of preparation, the time of prayer, the time of planning, the time of community is over. The time for action is now." In this event, we have Jesus at his most devout. This understanding that you pray in community and you pray for community. You pray for yourself. You pray for relief. But everything, good and bad, happens in the presence of God. Now, what we're going through right now, this pandemic, you may have heard some people say that this is God's punishment for this or that vice or this or that